You alright, guys? Just thought I'd say hello. I'm Jack, obviously. Fucking thanks for listening to the show and that, mate. You fucking let me know what you think of it when you're done with it. Fucking send it to a mate. Put it on your Instagram stories. It's probably one of the better ways you can share it with people. Leave a review, mate, if you're listening somewhere where you can leave a review. Otherwise, I'll let you get on with the show, mate. Yeah. Alright, guys. I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM, and this week I thought we could learn about a cryptid. And now, like many cryptids, this one could be a bit of a sexual deviant. You know, it's got a somewhat ambiguous description, and it might not be a cryptid at all. There's every chance it was just some form of experiment performed on a small town. So get your torches ready and peg up your bed sheets, because this week we're hunting for the Mothman of West Virginia. But first, we're going to have a song. This is the new song from Russ. It's called Cheers. The first reported sighting of the Mothman is reported as being the 12th of November 1966, and it's from a group of grave diggers. Apparently, this group of blokes hanging around digging up cemeteries, you know, that's fine if it's a job, but you know, I might have told you in the past, I'm not sure, but when I tell people that my dad and my uncle tried to get me to dig up my granddad's grave after my nan had died, everyone acts like they just feel sorry for me. Anyway, these group of diggers, they saw what they described as, and now this is a quote, this is verbatim, a brown human being, right? Which was leaping between the trees before dropping to the ground and taking off over the trees that were all around him, and then just disappearing into the night. Now, I don't want to cast dispersions, but to me that sounds a little bit, wrong, doesn't it? Because to me, that just sounds like a bunch of people that feel like they may be better than other people, if you get what I mean. Oh, look at me here, I'm digging. I'm a digger of graves. I'm far too special to see a Sasquatch. I saw a Sasquatch that can fucking fly, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's like one-upmanship kind of thing. Now, this group of night diggers claim that the creature was insanely fast and all, a trait that seems to be noticed by many of the other people that seem to have seen the creature. 3 days after this was another sighting of the cryptid, and it was from the eyes of a Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and a Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallet, which I can only presume is a distant possible relative of Timmy, or Timothy as he's known to his family. And these were these people, these four individuals, two married couples, were parked up in a so-called secluded spot, which, you know, does raise a couple of questions straight away, like why would a pair of married couples, why were they chilling in a fucking parked up car together in the dead of night? Like, that seems a bit odd. Now, I know that some people, you know, in the past might have thrown around allegations of drug use because it's the 1960s, and others might suggest that they're all partaking in, you know, in a little bit of swinging, the swinging 60s, you know. But I'm not going to make any assumptions like that. I don't think it's fair to speak ill of what I assume now are the dead. So we'll just say that they were doing, you know, maybe a little bit of hand stuff to each other amongst the couples, you know, like Mr. and Mrs. Roger were, Mr. and Mrs. Scarberry, let's call them, were having a little, might have been having a little bit of a fondle of each other, whilst Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallet may have been having a little bit of a fondle with each other, and we'll just leave it at that. You know, we're not going to make stuff up about them. But there is a chance that all of that cum must have opened some form of portal, like Jack Parsons had been trying to do around a similar time. You'll remember Jack Parsons was involved with L. Ron Hubbard, and they were trying to open portals. Now, this portal that opened up could have been a window into the realm of the Mothman, or maybe one of them had their eyes closed, right? Who was having a little bit of a fondle or being fondled, maybe just slight slim possibility that just as they reached orgasm, let's call it, let's keep it nice and polite, you know, it's a daytime radio show, just as they were orgasming, they started fantasizing about getting a little handy from a giant moth antenna, which, though, that's not all that believable really, because antennas look pretty sturdy, not much giving an antenna. Proboscis, the the twisty bit that comes off the face, you know, that curly bit that they can move around on the faces. A little bit more sexual too, because it's got the little hairs on it and the way it sort of spirals round like it could cup you and comfort you, you know. Anyway, like I said, I won't be making any assumptions, but it's just a possibility, you know. They could have opened a portal by performing sex acts in front of each other and just happened to have done it in the right place at the right time. Anyway, it's just something I was thinking about because of what we learnt the other week in that episode about the Greys with Jack Parsons. But it could also be possible that the gravediggers were actually just like how I imagine goths to be as well. That this could be why the gravediggers seen them, because I've always thought that the goths back at college that hung around in the cemetery, they were just doing that so they could fondle each other in private. That was my own assumption of them people that I went to college with. And maybe that's what the gravediggers also did. Maybe, as well, that's why gravediggers and people like that, and people that hang around in the dark at night time, maybe that's why they see more ghosts. Maybe they're all partaking in these perverted activities, you know, little sexual acts, and that's making them be a bit more open to these portals, and they're actually opening these doorways. Maybe that's why there's laws and rules against things like dogging, because the big they fucking know that if you keep doing this, if you keep going parking in fucking car parks and outside of fucking woods and in the woods, because the woods are a spooky place anyway. You don't need to be opening fucking portals to other dimensions in there, do you? But people could be doing it, and that could be why there's laws, because it's always seemed a weird law that you can't do things like that in public, like that's set in stone. No, you can't do that. Yes, you'd all want to do it, but you can't do it. Seems odd. Same as flashing people as well. That seems odd, but I mean that's kind of invasive in a weird roundabout way. Not that invasive, but I mean not even intrusive either, because you're letting them see a part of you. You know, you're not asking to see a part of them. If anything, it's sharing to the extreme. Anyway, it would be interesting to see how many of these doggers though have had paranormal experiences, wouldn't it, whilst out in a lay-by, you know. And if you're a dogger and you're listening to Threshold FM and you've had a paranormal experience whilst hanging out at the back of another man's wife, then get in touch, you know, and we might talk about it on a future show. Have you on for a little chat. And it would be a great way to see if sex magic does have any links to opening portals to other dimensions without actually having to do it myself, because it seems dangerous to do, especially with all these STDs that are knocking about. Now could that be, keeping with the same mentality there, could that be why hotels tend to be haunted as well? Because there's a lot of people going to hotels and, you know, shagging people that aren't the wives and husbands, and shagging the wives and husbands as well, you know, if they've been having a bit of difficulty at home and they've thought to themselves, oh, book us a weekend away, you know, that'll fix things, because she won't be around the dirty house that we've not been cleaning and looking after, but we'll be in a hotel, which will be fine, you know, it'll work there, we can do it there. Now, because of all of the sex that's happened in hotels over the years, could that actually be why they're haunted? Because they've opened so many portals to these different dimensions. Anyway, getting back to Mr. and Mrs. Scarberry and Mallet though, could jokes about them pair, well them pair of quadruple people, quadruples, quadrupeople, could we call them quadrupeople? Can we call Mr. and Mrs. Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Mallet quadrupeople? Or does that somehow imply that they're either centaurs or disabled? Either way, the pair of Mr. and Mrs. Scarberry and the pair of Mr. and Mrs. Mallet, could the jokes about them that I can only assume and I hope were being made about them at the time and in the newspapers as to, you know, why they were hanging around in these back lanes and that together of a night time, could that be where we actually get the sayings and the words for rogering and nailing from, you know, implying that these people may have been, you know, comedians or people on TV at the time might have been implying that these people were having it off in the car before they were interrupted by a 7-foot tall jet black creature with white wings and 6-inch glowing red eyes, right? Just a way to ease people into the cryptid stuff, you know, like, oh, look at these weirdos shagging in a field, and they were spotted by the Mothman. And everyone's already laughing, so they've took in the Mothman thinking, oh, the fuck's a Mothman, but it's still funny. Fucking, oh yeah, rogering, I'm going to say I'm rogering my missus tonight. You know, so maybe that's where that came from. Anyway, getting back to the cryptid though, the main piece of the show, if you like. The victims of this, let's call them a paranormal people, suggest that the creature reacted adversely to the headlights of the car, right? That's what, I think it was Mr. Scarberry said, that it didn't light the lights. And that's made me wonder if that's why we have such strong lights in cars. Like why we've worked rapidly harder over the past 60 years to improve car technology than we did in the 60 years prior to the Mothman encounters. Because you've got to think about it, innit? And I think it's weird that in a way we seem to have plateaued in vehicular technology, if you like, at some point, maybe let's say in like, I don't know, 2002. Let's say cars haven't got any better, really. There's not been any major changes apart from electric cars and hybrid cars. But really, that's still just the car. It's a fucking block of metal on four wheels. They haven't improved it, have they, beyond belief? They've not changed much. But one of the things that they have changed, right, and made better is they've added LED lights and stronger headlights, lights that we perceive as stronger. Headlights, right, that fucking blind the driver when they're in an older car. Happens to me all the time, pisses me off. But maybe this is why. Just like the recent transpirings around the world, where we could assume that sort of safety is a kind of afterthought. It's something that's used to try and bring about larger rules or to introduce new things into the world. Not all the time, obviously, because like the seatbelt was something that was created, the 3-point seatbelt was created and given away for free to the world, you know, so it's not always, safety's not always secondary, but some of the time I think it is, because, you know, like throughout lockdown the government seems to have brought in loads of new laws and rules, and we're yet to see if they'll be removed, meaning that they could have used the crisis of the time to instigate some new form of normality. Now, using that same avenue of thinking, I think it's very likely, you know, that the increasing power of car and motorbike headlights are less about increasing visibility, because there's now more cars on the road than ever, right? You can't deny that. So it's actually statistically are much easier to see a car on the road than at any other time in human history. And I think it's more so done, these lights, because these new filaments somehow affect this other dimension where these creatures come from. Maybe this was learnt back in 66, and if this is true, right, then that would be one of the greatest, seems like an understatement, but one of the greatest things to happen in human history, innit? Or at least one of the largest events in human history up until that point. It's also worth noting, right, that in 1966, England reached the final for the World Tournament in football, the World Cup, and a great way, right, to distract the English-speaking world at the time, especially, you know, the English. Just like how in 2021, England reached the final in a still similarly large football tournament, whilst a notable historical event was unfolding around us all over the world, almost as if there's some link. Lots of people, right, seem to believe that the virus itself came from space, but that could also mean it's from interdimensional space. Maybe the reactions in humans is because they're being, for want of a better term, possessed. And this could be what's affected the sporting teams of the world, and what's been allowed, you know, to allow England to win things and get close to winning things. Because think about Space Jam. Think about what was represented and shown to us in Space Jam, where the aliens would be able to take the abilities of the basketballers. But Jack, coronavirus wasn't around in the 1960s. Well, actually, fucking arsehole listener, it was. At least according to a Forbes article that I've read anyway. Around 1966, a new virus dubbed 229E was discovered by a researcher called Dorothy Hamre, which I also think was the whole Harambe thing, was that pushed and made a big thing, so that when you go to search Hamre, it'll actually autocorrect to Harambe. I'm not sure, trying to cover up that in the time. If everything is planned out like we believe it is, dear listener, then maybe that's why Harambe was made into such a big thing, so you could never look up the work of Dorothy Hamre. I'm not sure. Now, it's also worth noting, though, that about 20 or so years before 1966, so, you know, let's call it 1946, there was another form of bird flu and all, except this time it was called avian bronchitis, and it was mostly researched in chickens. Now, both of these things apparently are a type of coronavirus, and at the time, they were trying to find out what was causing the common cold when they discovered these things, which, as far as we're aware, right, they didn't discover what causes the common cold. But if you do remember that advert off the telly a few years ago, let's say 15, 16 years ago, right, there was an advert on the telly where a common cold was depicted as this fucking, like, mental, two-armed, green monkey kind of monster that used to latch onto your chest and try and suffocate you. Now, that kind of looked like a sleep paralysis demon, and that is another bit of pop culture that seems to link viruses with these unseen creatures of the fourth and fifth dimension. You can't even argue that. That is literally what it's doing. Now, I wouldn't want to say they're definitely from the fourth or fifth dimension, because it's something I don't know for certain, but it seems very clear that they could be and probably are the true cause for all so-called illnesses. Now, one way, right, that we are told by many scientists, if you like, we'll call them, that's what they like to be called. One of the things that they tell us is that strong enough light can kill a virus, innit? Or can at least kill or damage microorganisms. Sunlight, for example, was supposed to, and I think we've been told that recently, it can damage viruses. Silver, that's also antibacterial, both of which, silver and sunlight, or more specifically, let's say UV light and silver, fucking detrimental to vampires, right? And vampires could fucking well easily be an interpretation of a person that has been mostly taken over by these extra-dimensional creatures. Now, I also believe that vampires could be the reason for mirrors becoming much more affordable as well. Mirrors tend to now be lined with aluminium rather than with silver, which means that they can be accessed the world over, innit? It also means that a vampire can now see their own reflection in the mirror because there's no silver in there. Meaning, right, as well, that in the zeitgeist, everyone believes that vampires can't be seen, so they feel safe in mirrored rooms or IKEA and at the local butchers. But little do they know, right, that these mirrors are actually showing the quote-unquote vampires all around us, but we don't know the vampires because we can see them in the mirror. Now, I know that there's a good chance here that I might have lost a couple of yous with this, but bear with me. I'm trying to wangle my way back to my notes before we end up stuck in some weird little oxbow lake of knowledge. But in the same way that mirrors were made, right, from cheaper materials in order to make more money and to facilitate makeup sales, another product, by the way, which can help disguise extra-dimensional entities, as we learnt in the MIBs episode a couple months ago. Anyway, just like these mirrors being made to give everyone a false sense of security in regard to vampires, maybe vehicle headlights have been altered to be visibly brighter to us while secretly having a different effect on the other dimensions. Maybe something has been taken away from the lights or added or filtered, filtered from the spectrum of expelled light from the car, which means that we can't see these creatures anymore, but they can still use the car light to do something. That would also explain as well, why cars have become more widespread and haven't been replaced by a new type of vehicle for over 100 years, innit? Just slightly altered cars, as I said before. They don't float. We don't have wheels that can turn from fucking turn 90 degrees to help with parallel parking. Fuck all like that. Nothing. Because you'd think you just put some tracks above and below, caterpillar tracks or something. The wheels go onto it and then they just scoot over, and then you've got parallel parking, and you don't have to learn how to parallel park. But then the big they who are in charge of all the fucking driving instructors, fucking I don't know what they'd be called. Big driver seems a little bit fucking big teacher, big teach, big instructor. Either way, the driving instructor conglomerate that could also be in leagues with like Big Pharma and Big Pharma. Maybe they don't want people having this access to this sort of car technology, because then they wouldn't need as many lessons either. It's just that's a really weird aside though there, and it's a strange hill to die on. So we'll try and move away from that. But you got to see what I mean, innit? Like, I don't think it's too hard to believe that cars could also be a slow way of introducing these things. Like, we slowly change the lights of our cars, which slowly allows bigger and bigger and bigger portals to these other dimensions to form. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to also think that cars could also be a slow and effective way of terraforming the Earth for these creatures to be able to come into the Earth and feed and survive. And whilst we're talking about dimensions and the planet though, because this has been going round my head for a while, consider dimensions and planets, right? Think about them. Let's say that dimensions-wise there could be 26 of them, right? And let's just imagine, right, that we're on the 20th, right? We could be on the 20th dimension, in the 20th dimension, which would explain why 20th Century Fox is so important to society. But if you break the word planet down, right, to plain T, implying that there are at least 25 other planes of existence, if you look at it that way. But that's just a thought, and I've really fucking lost song. We'll have a song. This is Drop Top by R-Rated Rugged Man and High Res, and then we'll try and pick up where we left off. If you're struggling for like a Christmas gift or something for someone and you're thinking to yourself, I think a pair of mouse testicles or a love heart full of mouse intestines might be a bit strong for them. And whether it's for Christmas, birthdays, a late Valentine's Day gift, Mother's Day, or just, to show someone that you actually think about them. What about a shirt, mate? Like, as I'm recording this, I'm sat here in my shirt, which is a blue tie-dye shirt with a dead fox's head on it, wearing a safety helmet, a high-vis jacket with a fag in its mouth, chuffing on a fag. So that's an idea for you, 25 quid. There's rat people on shirts, there's rat people on canvases as well, some of my favourite rat people I've made so far. One of them shagging a Barbie doll, if you're into that, or you think your friends would be into that. They're $19.99, or you get them a bit cheaper if you've joined the Patreon and you use the discount code on the Patreon. There's other shirts though as well. There's a Get Your Rat Out shirt as well. There's all sorts, mate, all sorts of shirts and stuff now. Fucking rabbit toasters and that as well, mate. Even rabbit toasters on a mug. Go and fucking have a look, mate, but, fucking finish the episode and that first. Or have a look whilst you're listening to the episode, fucking double down on your world around you intake. Fucking, I'll let you crack on with the show though. Saying that though, right, one more thing about light bulbs, yeah? I heard that all these, the energy efficient and environmentally friendly lights that we have in our houses now by law have all got mercury in them, and they emit something that rots at your brain. So that's some little bit of homework for you listening. You could go and look into that. I heard about it in a seminar from David Icke, and I probably read it in a couple of other places as well. But maybe that's another example of how light bulbs are used to change how we perceive the world. And we're kind of taught this as well because of this thing with, you can put a filter in front of a light and see different colours and blah, 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 but they're not actually telling us the whole truth with it. And maybe as well, that's why the word enlightened is made to be a good thing, but maybe, right, if you're in the bright light, the limelight, if you like, I've always wondered if it's the limelight or limelight. I've never looked that up. I've never checked to see if it's an M or an N. I don't know. But maybe it's, you could see in being enlightened as that you can be seen by these creatures. Now, these chemicals are putting us in the limelight, and the chemicals emitted by these modern light bulbs, right? These could be simply marinating us for these creatures to be able to eat us or to consume our alleged life energy. And this might seem unfounded, innit? But the Mothman, right, was seen a lot around what the locals of the area dubbed the TNT mine or the TNT factory, maybe the TNT caves. I can't remember, TNT something or other. Which anyway, they seem to be caves where they made munitions at the time, which seems really strange because for the history that I know, I don't understand why America would need to hide a munitions factory inside of a cave, as they were already aware of an enemy, like, kind of thing. It implies that they were aware of someone flying above that was going to try and blow up the factories that were making explosives or whatever. Which, actually, to be fair, does kind of make sense when you learn about how the aliens came and deactivated a load of nuclear warheads at some point, which I think was in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, so there is that. Plus, it helps make sense for the whole Star Wars thing as well that Reagan was going for about 20 years later with the laser weapons and that, But again, I kind of think that the laser weapons thing is a misdirection, if you like. Look over here while we're doing this over here. A way to make you think that these monsters and that will be coming from above. But realistically, all those satellites that they're in the sky, they just face the Earth. So I think they've put them there so that when these creatures appear through these portals, they can hit them with these strong beams of light and destroy the doorways or the portals to protect us. But with that, all the concerns about the people that have made agreements, with the so-called aliens and that, it does really confuse me because I can never work out if the lights from these satellites that would be being emitted would be used to expel the extra-dimensional entities or to be able to create these portals to kind of welcome them into our realm. But anyway, satellites aside, it makes sense that these mercury-filled light bulbs are seasoning us, or because the Mothman seems to hang around this TNT location, implying that it could be nesting there, or the TNT mine could be its feeding grounds, eating up all these chemicals, slopping them up and that, maybe even using the chemicals, right? Maybe it's a man where something went wrong and he's trying to revert himself back into human form. Or maybe it's an extra dimensional entity or an alien that can shapeshift but can only do it every now and then unless they recharge themselves with chemicals and that, and now they're trying to recharge themselves so that they can shapeshift again and disguise itself as a human. But I have really fucking lost myself here. I said we won't talk about light bulbs anymore and I did, so we're going to have another song and then I'm going to get back to my notes. This is Razorblade Salvation by Jedi Mind Tricks. Right, getting back into what we actually know, rather than just my thoughts. And we'll continue with the timeline that I tried to set out earlier, right? Now we've got, after Roger and Mr. and Mrs. Mallet, right? We've got a couple of firemen, except they weren't real firemen, they were volunteers or something along those lines, I can't quite remember, but it's almost like the fire department of Point Pleasant were kind of edging the bets just in case these fellas decided to release books or maybe went public later on, so that they could choose to not be affiliated with the guys that spread the news about the Mothman. Now, it is worth noting that even if they were unpaid, you have to believe that these wannabe firemen, let's call them, were hoping to later get a full-time job in the local fire department. And that means that even at the level they were at, there's still some form of government worker and would have to toe the party line, innit? So if their organisation is categorically against their population knowing the truth that the firemen saw the Mothman, then that means that the firemen would have to lie about seeing the Mothman. Now, I really wonder, though, if this is something that has changed retrospectively. Have they gone back and edited this in the newspapers or whatever? Mostly because it seems weird to have a news story about two blokes seeing what they simply described as a very large bird with red eyes. And that's what's really annoying about this whole Mothman bit, because it gets, around this bit, it gets really easy to just debunk it all. But to understand the debunking, you really need to know what it is that we're debunking. Now, a man that was called, a man professor called Dr. Robert L. Smith claims that the sightings of the Mothman were nothing more than a species of bird known as the Sandhill Crane. And this shows the limitation, in my opinion, of the use of science in our world, especially in the modern world. Scientists they'll use very little evidence. He completely disregards all the first-hand evidence from the married couples, which you got to remember are people that have always been very highly regarded in society, or at least so we're told, until they see the Mothman, until they see an alien, until they see a UFO in the sky, until they see Bigfoot, until they see a ghost, until they see Nessie and get a picture of Nessie, until they get a picture of Bigfoot. They're the highest in society, and then we look down on them when they see these things. We pretend that they're not worth listening to. And these scientists, right, they'd rather just use a checklist, but then they'll only check off one item, maybe 2 items on that checklist, rather than all of them, which would say you've got a list of fucking 10 things, and if it's got all those 10 things, it's a Sandhill Crane. If it's not got all of those 10 things, it isn't a Sandhill Crane. It could be a Sandhill Crane, could also be something else though, innit? But they would rather check off 1 or 2 of these bits on this checklist and then say, yeah, it must be a Sandhill Crane, this must be. But if I said to you, as just as an example off the top of my head, if I said to you, I've got this thing in my hand, right, that grows on trees. It's a purpley colour, and it's got a stone inside it, right? Straight away, that could be a plum, could be a cherry. You couldn't tell it's definitely one or the other just from that information. It's forever either a plum or a cherry. Like, surely, in the very thought of science, like, it's the Schrodinger's cat of the fucking stoned fruits, But, obviously not. Let's get calmed down a bit, and then, I'm losing myself again. I don't know why I'm getting etchy over this episode, but it's not either in the scientist's eyes, it's not either a Sandhill Crane or a 7-foot man-moth hybrid living in a cave. It's definitely a Sandhill Crane in the eyes and expertise of Dr. Bobby Smith. Even though your average Sandhill Crane only reaches about 4'6", a fact that was suggested at the time, right, as being about average height for a man. Which I really fucking doubt, because I'm not looking it up to check it out. It's just impossible to believe. But I'm wondering, right, if that's true, though, does that mean it lends more fact to Anatoly Fomenko's idea of us only being around for about 800 years or so as a people, or at least since when Jesus existed, which Jesus' birth we use as the start of our time. So if we were only all 4'6", 4'5" in the time of fucking 1966, also bringing up the football again, have they kept the football nets the same size, the goals the same size since we were all 4'6"? I wouldn't have thought so, because there would have been a hell of a lot more goals. The game would have been really easy for anyone playing it. Maybe that's why it's gotten harder over the years for people, because they've gotten taller and the goalie can reach further. I don't know, I'm not a sports guy. But if the birth of Jesus was the year zero, but that was only 800 years ago, maybe then, and we've always said, people get taller over time, maybe then I could accept that average height in America in 1966 was 4'6", and that a Sandhill Crane could have been seen as well, they even said it was a particularly large man. That's what it looked like. Now, 4'6", if that was the average height, that's not particularly large. That's average, innit? That is just average height. But it's not average height. 4'6" is not average height for a bloke, right? I'm 6 foot, I think. Maybe an inch less, maybe an inch more. I've got no idea. That's about average height, surely. Surely that's about average height. I think most people are about my height. At least in my family, anyway. Apart from my mum and dad, which has always kind of made me question. I think that's why I've always questioned my reality as well, because I've always been, for a very long time now, I've been at least a head and shoulders above them both, which is weird, especially from like mid-teenage years. So you're always doubting everything around you. Anyway, enough about me. So to understand, right, why the scientist, so-called scientist, Big Bob, to understand why he's wrong, as I said, a Sandhill Crane, right, 4'6" on average. They have a red face, a 2-metre wingspan, which, for those of you that are confused because I'm using foot and inches and metres, a 2-metre wingspan's about 6'5", right? Whilst flying, as well, Sandhill Cranes don't really flap the wings about. They use heat in the air to be able to float through the sky. Now, most importantly, when you look at the living habitats, not habitats, well, I suppose, they differ. So they live in different places around the country in America. But they tend to migrate in the winter to the southern warmer climates, the southern warmer states. Now, it's worth remembering that these initial encounters, right, that we had with the Mothman, they happened in the fucking middle of November, which according to science, right, that would have been winter back in the 60s. It would also have been much colder than the Novembers of today, if you believe science. So you got to believe that the fucking Sandhill Cranes would have fucking left there, innit? Definitely would have left, because it would be cold. It's now the middle of winter. It's no longer the middle of winter, November, according to science, because of so-called fucking man-made global warming. Another flaw, as well, that I found in the Sandhill Crane theory, is that they have the longest-lasting fossil record of any bird species, or at least one of the longest, and spanning around, fucking 1.5, 1.6 million years ago from, these fossils. That's what I think it said. Anyway, I've wrote down 1.5 to 6 million. Anyway, now that's a very long time ago, innit? But the same article that I read, it did claim that these birds haven't changed since then, which completely disregards science in terms of evolution, because if what we learnt about dinosaurs is true, then that means that fossils are man-made anyway, much like recent global warming, if you believe science, and that means that these fossils could have been put there by the big they in order to cover up the Mothman and his very existence. Yet just another example of America trying to destroy or alter world history. And maybe, right, if the Mothman is a solitary creature like the monster of Lake Champlain, which we learnt about in fucking ages ago, then it's another example of the Americans trying to completely eradicate a people. Because I will say, now I will go down on record as saying Mothman is definitely more man than moth. Now, to help understand why Robbie Smith was wrong, or if we say it a little more clearer, a liar, to understand why Robert Smith was a liar, right, we need to understand the Mothman a bit, because I've not really spoke about him, and the whole show's supposed to be about the Mothman. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Mothman now. I've compiled all of the descriptions about him that I could find, and you've already heard a couple, but just bear with me. Now, he was described by the gravediggers as a brown human being. He was described by the folks in the cars, having white wings with a 10-foot wingspan, bright red eyes that are about 6 inches apart. I've read stuff about him being a clumsy runner after he tried chasing after a car and he was flying fine on low ground and he ran off into the fields, but it was all clumsy, like falling all over the place. Other people have said he looked like a man with wings. Some people have even said he resembles a sleep paralysis demon. Now, to pick that apart, it's a shame that you can't see that list of words in your head and this next bit, but I'm going to try and do my best to try and build that in your head for you. Sandhill Cranes, right, they're a kind of browny colour, predominantly grey, I would say. They're more of a grey coloration, and they have a 2-metre wingspan as compared to Mothman's 10-foot wingspan. So that's like, I don't know, like 6 foot 6'5"-ish, 6'4"-ish wingspan compared to 10 foot. Big difference. They do have red faces though, Sandhill Cranes, around their eyes, like that red, bright red fleshy bit, but nothing I can see about them and learn about them suggests that they then reflect light from the face like a fucking back of a bicycle. Do you know what I mean? Also, their heads look nothing like a human head. If anything, they look like a type of heron. A heron crossed with a small ostrich, let's say. A rhea with a long beak. And they're also a bird as well, which is worth saying. I don't think I've actually said they're a bird. I thought you'd get that by crane, but, not to assume, I'm not going to assume anyone's intelligence. And if they look like a bird, they definitely don't look like a human at all. There's no part of them that makes them look like a person other than the bipedal. The heads are nowhere near 6 inches in width either, so it's hard to believe that the eyes would in fact be 6 inches apart on a Sandhill crane, on any type of Sandhill crane. I'd also say that they run with intent as well. I've watched a few videos now of them running, which I'll add to my Discord, I think, if I remember, when I put the show out on Wednesday. Now, it could be possible that somehow there's been a wildly mutated one that's knocking about in the hills because of the munitions factory and any chemicals that may have leached out into the soil and infected things with it. I'm not sure. But if we are to believe scientists, then that itself is nearly impossible because evolution takes millions of years. And we've already learnt from fossil records, right, that they haven't changed for about 1.5 million years. So I'd argue that rules that out almost completely. So we've completely debunked the Mothman debunking. I just think it's strange, I really do, that yet again a scientist is happy to rule out something mental by using outlandish claims of a 7-foot freak of nature bird that chooses to chase cars. Now, personally, I've never witnessed a sleep paralysis demon, because that's the end of the little list of the checklist there, but I've looked at artwork for it, people's drawings and that's the closest we're going to get to a photograph of such things without access to a Polaroid Spectre. And it does seem to resemble some of the drawings that I've found. But it also resembles the idea, this is the Mothman, not the Sandhill Crane, it also resembles the idea of the, just of demons and fallen angels and shadow creatures in general, maybe even a normal angel, which realistically, to be honest, most of them things are probably all the same creature anyway. Let's have a song. This is Concepts 2 by Khan. Well, seeing as this is the Mothman episode, right, I thought I'd just interject with a little advert for the shirts and artistic prints that I've got on worldaroundyou.com at the minute. Mothman with his cock out, mate, on a t-shirt, on a poster, and if for those of you that don't want to wear a massive swinging dick on your shirt, there's Mothman without his dick out as well. 25 quid for the shirts, can't remember the price of the prints, to be dead honest with you, but that's because of this episode. I waited until this episode to tell you about them on here, I hope. But yeah, because of this episode I started selling shirts, so there's all sorts of shirts, but yeah, fucking Mothman with his cock out. Anyway, well, let's get back into the story of the Mothman. The next interaction with the Mothman in the timeline that I've set out here, we got a bloke called Newell Partridge, aka the Newell Birdman. Possibly a guy that was jealous of being overshadowed by the Mothman, because he was the local birdman of the area, and now, the Mothman's here and doing better than he was. So he made up slanderous remarks about him, right? He reported strange patterns appearing on his telly and hearing these weird noises in the garden. So he says that he went outside and he shone a torch into the garden and he saw these 2 bright red eyes glaring back at him. Now, there is a chance that this could have been a Sandhill Crane, let's, stick him with fucking Bobby Boy, but there's also a chance it could have been a pair of Sandhill Cranes having a little dance together, But, again, very, very unlikely, because there'll be no Sandhill Cranes in the area, because according to science, they migrate south. So you've got to, with science, it seems you've really got to pick and choose what it is you want to believe. What are you going to put faith in? What sort of science? What things do you believe? What don't you believe? And so let's imagine it's one Sandhill Crane, one very lonely Sandhill Crane in Virginia in the cold in November, because all the others have fucked off to the south for a bit of winter heat. And I'm wondering though, right? Could it be that the Mothman is a shapeshifter? I kind of touched on it before. Let's say it took on the appearance of the creatures that it thought were the main inhabitants of Plain T. Maybe it saw loads of cranes when it first came through its hole and gave itself wings and copied their way of communication, and then it was trying to learn and adapt, kind of like in Jeepers Creepers, I guess. Maybe that's what that could be based on, the Mothman. I never thought about that until right now. Maybe that's what Jeepers Creepers is based on. Jeepers Creepers. Sounds better. Could be the fourth one, I guess. Jeepers Creepers. But anyway, maybe then it learnt to adapt and become more human-like in order to blend in, which would also, just as a thing to mention here, it would tie it in with other things. Like, for example, with the TV disturbance, right? I did look into this a bit, and there was been, around that time, 1965, 1966, in West Virginia, there was fucking loads of poltergeist activity in the area. There was also a lot of Men in Black activity and Men in Black sightings in the area, before people really knew or had a name for the Men in Black. One, in particular, which is going to get his own episode, called Indrid Cold, which is a fucking creepy guy, known as the Smiler, known as the Grinning Man, things like that. Creepy. We'll do an episode on him, I promise, at some point. Right. But all of that, right? All of this going on at once really adds and lends itself to my idea of large sporting events being connected to alien activity. The perfect distraction or collection of people all feeling emotion in a confined space, right, in order to allow a portal to open. And now, I'm not 100% sure on it. I haven't got all the science, well, I wouldn't have science behind it, but I haven't got all of my ideas behind it yet, but I will flesh it out a bit with a bit more research. Now, some people say, right, that a Sandhill Crane will eat small animals if it's pushed to it, you know, if it's hungry. And Mr. Partridge himself, Mr. Bird, he had his dog go missing the night that he had this encounter with the Mothman. Now, I don't know what breed the dog was, but let's imagine it was a Rottweiler, right? There's fucking no chance, mate, that a Sandhill Crane could take down and carry off and eat a Rottweiler whole, not leaving any trace. But an interdimensional creature known as the Mothman probably could. I couldn't argue that I can't say it can't. I don't know for a fact, but I do know that a Sandhill Crane couldn't eat a Labrador. It couldn't eat a Rottweiler. There's a lot of stuff that it probably couldn't eat. Dog-wise, it could probably eat maybe a Chihuahua. That's a small animal. But it's the 60s. Did Chihuahuas exist? I don't know. Maybe they seem to be a recent invention. Not a local invention. A recent invention. Which, again, goes completely against evolution. But this isn't a show about evolution. This is a show about the Mothman. So, moving through this little timeline that I've structured of the Mothman interactions, then we've got the last event, and what a fucking event it was. To say he brought the house down, right, would be obviously factually inaccurate, because it was actually a bridge, and people claimed to see the Mothman at the top of a bridge before it collapsed. Engineers, unlike scientists, right, actually consider the real world, and they think that the problem in the bridge was at the top, which does coincide where the Mothman was seen. Now, what engineers believe the problem was is that it was done with, from my understanding of it, now I'm not an engineer, but from my understanding of what happens with it, right, it's like a metal rope going up and down and up and down and up and down, going higher and higher and higher and lower and lower and higher, getting longer and longer to make a suspension bridge. But for some reason back then they only made the bridges because they didn't know, supposedly, so they say. But I think maybe it was so they could sell the same bridge twice, maybe, which is something that we get told about. The guy that used to sell bridges that weren't his. Well, is that where this actually comes from? It's a way to try and disguise all this, but I will get into that in a minute. But these bridges, these suspension bridges, if one point broke, it didn't have any stability, so it would break. And they also say that cars used to be lighter, and all of a sudden cars were getting heavier and heavier and heavier because they were being made to pump out more noxious gases in order to terraform the planet, ready for the aliens and extra-dimensional entities. So that's something worth bearing in mind. But anyway, that's the problem with the bridge, according to engineers anyway. Now, I do have some thoughts about this. I'm wondering if this whole Mothman debacle was a way to shine a light on bridges around America, and ironically, a light that lured a fucking massive moth creature. Could the whole Mothman fiasco have been a way to sell bridges? There was lots of other paranormal activity happening in the area at the time, and if it was all just some form of psyop or of some description, maybe it was just a matter of seeing which one of the locals would go for more, which one of these paranormal activities would the locals buy into more. The men in black weren't quite cutting it for the West Virginians, and the poltergeist was probably way too localised or too personal to the person experiencing it, and no one really cared. But a 7-foot-tall moth-human hybrid that could have fucking 4-foot caterpillars just lurking in the woodlands, waiting to invade your small town. Now that fucking would sell newspapers. That would probably sell newspapers now. And again, to tie it into sporting events, while all the fucking football stuff's been going on, what's been in all the fucking tabloids on front page for days, mate, during the fucking towards the final? UFOs. We've seen UFOs. Look at these aliens. People are saying aliens are real. Aliens, UFO, UFO, UFO. It's the same thing, mate. It's just the same thing. History repeats itself. It's fucking bizarre. And anyway, people only need to be kind of told about something as well repeatedly in order to start believing it. So this might be a way to get them ready for the aliens, because they're already happy because of the footballs going on. They're seeing the UFO stuff. They're taking that in, absorbing that subconsciously, and then they'll start believing it. But they've got to have it repeated to them all the time. Otherwise, they won't believe it. Because otherwise, like fucking church would only have to be once a month. Church wouldn't have to be every week if people could believe stuff just because they're told it. That church probably wouldn't be a service every week, if that was the case. Now, people were scared of the Mothman though, because he's the fucking Mothman. He's 7 foot tall, he can fly, he's got bright red glowing eyes, and he chases cars. They were also wondering what it wants, what's it going to do? And maybe the plan all along was to demolish the bridge in order to facilitate the sale and the lucrative construction that I would imagine goes into building a bridge. All of the transportation costs, the labour costs, everything involved with it. It's a lot of money moving around in it, meaning that they could immediately build a new bridge that engineers would say is more equipped to handle the added weight of them than modern day cars. But because it had never fell, no one would want to pay for a new bridge because there's no problem with the bridge. It's fine, the bridge still works. Why would I want a new bridge when I've got that bridge there? But, right, if the bridge had just collapsed randomly, the local government would have got the blame, innit? Or the local council or whatever it's called there. Whereas, if they can manage to pin the bridge collapse on the almost mythical Mothman, then no one's to blame except an extra-dimensional entity that they can later convince people never existed in the first place once they've actually managed to sell bridges all around the country. Mothman-proof bridges, a true example of problem-reaction solution in one of its earliest forms. Now, speaking of overarching conspiracy, though, I think there's a chance that it could have all been an experiment along the lines of MKUltra, like I said, with the psyops, widespread fear propagated by the newspapers. It was a story that it spread all around the States as well in all different newspapers, so it got syndicated basically. So it could have been a way to experiment how you can spread fear around the people, which, again, wasn't out the normal actions of the American government to do, like when they used vampires in the Philippines in the 1950s. Not literal vampires as such, as I discussed earlier, but the fear of a legend about a specific type of vampire that would make people run away and then allow American forces to invade and take over an area to get rid of the communists. But in a way as well, I guess you could also argue that the so-called communists were just another form of possibly unseeable enemy. Something they could use, in order to take control of a place or to be able to have some form of influence in a place. Like how the Mothman could have just been used to, made up and that to sell bridges. Personally, I think it's going to be a bit more like what Churchill said about never wasting a crisis. A literal Mothman creature, right? Mothman existed. But, a creature that resembled a real-life Batman was flying around, terrorising a town and tore down a bridge. And the bigwigs, they'd already wanted to build a bridge, so they probably just used it as an excuse to build new bridges. And there was a man around that time that stood up against the leaders of America, and a quote from that man, that very strong man, and he said, "Let's build bridges." And that man, ladies and gentlemen, was Martin Luther King Jr., a man that was assassinated less than 4 months after the destruction of that first bridge. And that, guys, is all we've got time for this week. Later on, we'll have HDR and Jim will mix it on Threshold FM. And I think we're on tomorrow at 7 with Truth Seeking, so I'll see you then. I'll see you in a bit. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening, man. If you enjoyed the show, you should probably go and try Truth Seeking. That's TROOF Seeking, as in like SEEKING, not like a fucking type of helicopter. But it's me and Jimmy Budd, a comedian from the UK, from England, like me. Don't know why I'm saying it like that. Either way though, go and fucking have a listen. You can find one or two in the feed for this. There's the Crop Duster, but there's should be by the point you're listening to this, at least 15 episodes going out for Truth Seeking. So you might enjoy that, mate, and fucking leave a review on here and that. Leave a comment if you've watched it on YouTube. And if you do have YouTube as well, you can actually watch some of these. You can have them playing on a loop with my cartoon playing on a loop whilst you listen to 4 or 5 episodes of it. So, maybe throw that on at night time or something, because that might help as well, because that might mean I can eventually monetize my YouTube. Anyway, fucking thanks for listening, man. I'll see you in a bit.